Hello, I'm Dr. Barbara Shannon Bannister, Chief of the Community Relations Division for the City of Aurora. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're going to be talking about angry black men. Last year when we did this particular segment, we had a comment about why are black men angry. And so we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But first I want my panel to introduce themselves. On my far left, who are you?
My name is Quincy Hines. I am the Regional Director of Barbershop Talk.
And what's Barbershop Talk?
Barbershop is an organization of a group of men who actually talk about issues that ail them, that they deal with within their communities. And then, of course, we get out there and we volunteer our time to mentor and partner with other organizations.
All right. And sir, on my immediate left?
My name is Doug Cyphers, and I started a group called doyouknowme.org. And it's really just that, trying to get to know. I realize that, and I'm coming from a Christian perspective, and realize that in the church we are still very segregated, and what can we do about that?
All right. And on my immediate right is?
My name is Vern L. Howard, and I am the chairman of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Colorado Holiday Commission. And our organization, we have events throughout the year. Our purpose is to educate the people of Colorado on the dream, the purpose, the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and his nonviolent movement.
And how long has the commission been a commission?
30 years actually. 30 years this year.
You sure?
You were one of the original ones. 30 years.
Okay, and it was originally made into a commission by then Governor Lamb.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Dick Lamb on April 4th.
That's right.
That's
Okay.
right. April 4th of 1984.
All right. Thank you.
You were there for the signing.
So, angry black men. Why are black men angry?
You know what, I believe that black men are angry because of the circumstances. Education, economics, opportunities. I believe that black men have not been afforded the opportunities for so long, and we're angry, you know. I believe that through that anger we can actually make positive changes if we just learn how to channel them.
All right, you said some things because of lack of education, some lacks of things.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think you've been denied that, or you haven't seek to have access to it?
I think it's a little of both, actually. When we look at education, we look at the schools. Obviously, from what I understand, the schools are owned by the government. They're also funded by property taxes and other influences. I believe that, you know, within certain communities, the schools don't have as many resources as they need, and versus other communities that do. And so some of the students aren't afforded, you know, the proper education. There's, you know, lack of teachers, you know, passionate teachers who love their profession, and then of course too, I'm upset with the parents because of, you know, the facts are that if students are in the classroom behaving themselves, if they learn how to sit still, be quiet, and allow the teacher to teach, I think that kids will learn a lot more. So I think it's kind of twofold.
Okay, and as a former teacher, I think that children today learn differently than they used to.
Mm-hmm.
In my generation, we were much more obedient to our parents,
Mm-hmm.
and not as attentive to what our peers were doing, because our parents were the authority figure. In my household, my parents were the authority figure,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what my peers wanted to do. Not that I'm saying I was goody two shoes. No, I was far from that. But I knew where the line in the sand was.
Yeah.
So I think education has not caught up with the technology that young people are using today. You know, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds can program things, and the educators who have the PhDs and all that just haven't caught up with all of that to teach them in that way so that they can learn quicker and faster. Give me some other comments. That's just Barbara's comment about that.
Dr. Bannister, I agree with you. In fact, the way we were raised, our parents was actually the community. We could not cut up. I remember leaving home and Paul would say, "Don't do anything that'll embarrass your mother or Jesus." And Grandma would always say to us, "Don't do anything you don't want to read about in the paper tomorrow." And I don't believe that the young people today channel or have that same respect. And I believe kind of what Quincy was saying, that a lot of the reason for that, piggybacking what you said as well, is based on education. Back in our day, education started at home. We had a 2-parent home. One parent didn't have to go and work maybe 2 jobs to provide food, shelter, and clothing for their children. So there was always someone there to give guidance and direction. And in our home, the guidance and direction before any woodshed came from the Bible. There was a family Bible, and my God, that would be worse than the spanking that may ensue afterwards, because that would be an hour and a half long sermon. The children today, they don't respect the badge on the police officer, the teacher in front of the classroom, or the elder in the community. And that's where the lack of education comes from, and that is why I, as a black man, am angry. And that is why we have the youth conferences and the things, and we bring in the elders to teach the young people. We don't sit at the feet any longer of our elders and learn the history, because the history is what will teach you how to act, how to behave, and how to sit still in class.
Indeed.
And that rolls right into you, Doug, when you said you come from a Christian perspective.
Yes.
So tell me about the Christian perspective.
I'm afraid to say anything.
Doug, Doug, I'm a Christian too, so it's okay.
I think we all are.
Yeah, we all are Christians.
Well, and yeah, it was interesting to
You're in good company.
I hear that a lot, and it is kind of a balancing act to think about. You know, one thing as a white evangelical that I have to think about is, do I even have the right to engage the conversation? I think a lot of people like me, you know, see things changing in the culture, but are not really sure how to have the conversation about what to do about it.
And I'm not sure we know all the time what the conversation should be. I don't always agree with Quincy or with Vern.
Right.
And Vern just said something a few minutes ago that I could have disagreed with, but I decided because I was moderating I should not disagree with him. So, but we wanted you here because we wanted to have your perspective, because this is not just us. I want to know what you see in us too.
Yeah. Well,
And be frank, please.
And don't be afraid.
Okay. I see some of the stereotype, and actually Do You Know Me is based on, unfortunately, it's easier to accept the stereotypes and just go with those rather than really get to know people. And if I get to know each one of you, I will find a different perspective. I know that. And so it's really difficult to have this conversation with more than 2 people, really. And what our group is trying to encourage is just finding ways to connect people so that we can have the dialogue. And that's why I think barbershop talk is a great thing. I wish it was more integrated.
Indeed.
And, you know, I think I will say that a lot of white evangelicals are nervous to even approach that conversation.
Indeed.
Because they do get pushback. And they are unfortunately ignorant of a lot of the things that are being talked about.
And I think the same thing would happen if it were a white evangelical gathering. A black or an African American might be hesitant to walk up into that group too. So therefore, I think the same reticence or the same fear exists depending on what the population would be, et cetera. So I'm just glad you're here. I'm glad you accepted, and we're not going to tar and feather you or stone you tonight.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
We're not going to
It's
do
good to
that
know.
because I value you, and we've been friends for a while, and so I value your experience. And I want to know more about what you do, because maybe there are things that I'm not doing that I need to be doing in connection with you, so that we come closer together and understand each other better.
Well, if I could say one more thing.
Sure.
One of the things that even in the speech that Martin Luther King Jr., the I Have a Dream speech, he talked about the inequality, but he also gave a warning that African Americans, Negroes, not buy into the bitterness, and that they hold on to that and become angry and bitter. So, from my perspective as a Christian, I want to see ways to deal with those wounds and have more healing as a culture, so that we can go forward together.
All right. Comment, feedback.
I'd like to actually comment on that too, because in the community we've actually been talking about post-slavery disorder, postpartum slavery disorder, and it's kind of equated to some of the military personnel that come back from the war. We have never dealt with our anger. Even after the civil rights movement, even after Martin Luther King and stuff like that, we've never really truly dealt with the emotions of watching our ancestors murdered, raped by men running around in white hoods. You know what I mean? We never dealt with any of that. We never dealt with what it would look like to be prosperous as an African American or an American of African descent, I like to put it. So we're walking around with a lot of this anguish and this anger that from our ancestors. What does it look like to put somebody back, or to interject someone into a community and allow them to function as a citizen? Some tend to shy away from the whole angry black man syndrome. Others embrace it to use it as energy towards making true positive change. And then of course there's some who would rather use the violence and settle in the bitterness, which to me is kind of a reversal of hate. But at any case, I believe that we need to take a little bit more of a stance on dealing with how do we resolve the issues. And like Doug said, I think it's important that we create that dialogue. It's important. Barbershop talk has been around for a little while, and we've got quite a few Anglo Americans that come because they see the value in African Americans dealing with what we hold internal.
Let me just say one little thing. Let me say one word. Forgiveness. If you can't forgive, you're not going to ever let it go. Because you know who you're hurting?
Myself.
That's right. The people out there that you haven't forgiven yourself, you haven't forgiven them. You're the one walking around with the albatross around your neck, not them. So forgiveness is the word. And that comes from my Christian background, and it's not easy to do when you think someone has done something to you wrong that you didn't deserve. So I'm sorry, I just had to interrupt that, but go right ahead. I'm sorry.
I like to add a word, and that word is justice. One of the things that I'm hearing Quincy talk about, and my mind is going back to several scenarios. We can talk about slavery. We can talk about all the different African American or black people who've been imprisoned falsely. We can talk about the Rodney King beating. We can talk about the O.J. Simpson verdict. And one of the things I'll never forget, we had a forum right after the O.J. Simpson forum or trial and verdict. And one of the things I'll never forget that came out of that was a lot of the black people, it was here in Aurora, on that forum said, we finally felt we got some justice. We finally felt as if we finally was vindicated for all the wrongs that had been done to us. And I think about that, and as a historian, I sit back and I look at all of the different things that have happened and how black people have reacted. And the problem that had always bugged me, when we had the riot during the parade in 1992 here in Denver, I'll never forget how when the Klansmen stood on the state capitol stairs and just uttered words, just words, how all at once the crowd, when they couldn't get to him, they turned on each other. They were angry and they didn't know how to channel that anger. They turned on each other. When Rodney King was beaten and the verdict came back for the police officers, they turned in their own community, burned their own communities. When Dr. King was assassinated, the exact same thing happened. And that's not knowing how to channel that anger, how to deal with that anger, or how to make positive change with that anger.
Well, we got a little bit better with Trayvon Martin. We didn't do it.
Well, and I don't believe they will. However, that brings me to the point that when President Obama was elected, again, justice. We're finally, the Jefferson theme song, we're moving on up. And that is how a lot of black people of my generation have looked at it. Is that we're finally starting to see the wheels turning and the winds of change blowing in our direction. They're not taking a look at the things that when you ask a lot of black people, how do you define success? A lot of them would talk about the wealth of a lot of, wealth as being one of them. We were talking earlier behind the stage of how Cadillac was the symbol of you finally arrived. And when you stop and look at the wealthiest people in this country, most of them are black as they're athletes. And yet and still they don't see the justice and the vindication in that. They don't look at the Oprah Winfreys and the Tyler Perrys and the Dave Stewarts of worldwide technology. They seem to want to focus on the Vern Howards, the Quincy Hines that live in the Denver, Montbello, Aurora area, instead of looking at what can I do to build myself up and bring someone up with me. And I say that because as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the commission, and Dr. Bannister and I have had this conversation before. Well, what really wasn't a conversation, I'd talk and she'd listen. and I speak about how they brought me up, how I was the youngster that they brought onto the commission. And we're talking some 20-some years ago. And now I'm like, we need youngsters on the commission. And the principals, there's a TV anchor in Denver who said something to me one day. I was joking with her and I said something off color. And she says, Vern, don't do it. You are front page news. And I was like, I'm kidding. The point that I'm getting at, though, is that we either take things way too seriously or not serious enough. And education is one of those things we do not take serious enough.
Okay.
And I think that emotional intelligence, behavioral intelligence is a big key. Obviously, we're an emotional people. It's a given. Everybody knows this. You incite something, you can watch us react. You know what I mean?
So we're not the only emotional people.
Oh, no, no, no. We're not the only emotional.
Don't say it like we are the most
That's not
No,
emotional people.
I take pride in that, because
Okay.
the way I look at it is that I do have a soul. I do have empathy. Because see, back during the civil rights era, that was when we were trying to prove that we were more than 1/5 human. You understand what I'm saying? I have emotions. You know, my emotions ebb and
That's
flow.
interesting that you say that, because I never thought of that. We were trying to prove that we were human. Never thought about it. But let me go. But go ahead, because our time is running out. Because I want to get to what are we going to do about
Yes.
being angry black men.
Well, and that's what I'm getting to now, because I believe that if we learn how to control our emotions, even those of us, and why I say us is because we're only as strong as our weakest link, I believe. If we learn how to control our emotions, our behavior, so that, you know, if something does happen in public, where there's an embarrassment like Trayvon Martin, we can learn to harness the energy and use it productively. How do we change laws? How do we get involved to change laws? How do we get involved to change the education system, to revamp whatever's going on with that? How do we deal with the economic disparities and so forth? These are some of the solutions that we can use to better our circumstances. We definitely need to learn how to work better together.
All right. Okay, that's a good thing. Let me get over here to Doug, please. I don't want you to just sit here and be mute here with us. I want you to say something, respond to us.
Well, I guess as a Christian, since we're kind of short on time, one thing I would like to say is that I don't think it's healthy for anyone to hang on to anger. You know, Scripture says you will be angry at times, but it also says don't let the sun go down on it. You're to move away from that, to let go of it. And anything you can do in anger, you can do better not in anger, in love. And so I do think that we need to be strong. We need to be willing to speak up and say, that's not right. It's not right in the white world, it's not right in the black world. And when we get to the point where we can say that and not be afraid of, you know, how it's going to be received, I think we'll be in good shape.
One short remark.
Take a page from Dr. King and the very first movement, the Montgomery movement, 381 days of coming together, changing the society, changing the way things were done, working together and making sure the laws that Quincy's talking about that we need to try and change, do it in a productive way. We may not have seats at the table. We may not be represented in the State House. However, our dollars, if you count the dollars that Black Americans spend in the United States alone, we'd be the 5th largest country in the world.
All right.
If we focus on the positives and make sure we vote, make sure we don't just register, but vote, you can make change.
Well, obviously, we're going to continue this conversation tomorrow night at 7 o'clock at the Martin Luther King Jr. Library, 9898 East Colfax Avenue, 80010, Aurora. And let's come together and talk more about this and come up with some solutions. I don't want to just keep talking about it. Let's come up with some positive things we're going to do to make things change. It says you can't separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.
God bless.